All right, class, welcome to class today. Today we're going to be doing the sectionalism review to try to break down some of the concepts that are going to be on your exam tomorrow on Tuesday. Again, I pushed the test back a little bit just to try to give y'all some more ample time to review and give y'all an actual review like I'm doing now, instead of just giving you all a review sheet. So I review this video as many times as you need. It'll be on Schoology. You'll be seeing it in class. And so I'm going to be going over the review sheet and some other key ideas that are going to be important for your success on the test. So let's go ahead and get right into it. Now, looking at number one. If I can go back up. Number one. Start timer. All right. So what is the Missouri Compromise? Remember, the Missouri Compromise is one of the first issues that we talked about that's going to lead to the sectionalism of the country, which again is the idea that the country is beginning to split apart. Right? We have two, or really three, key sections of the country that are going to be splitting apart between the North, the South, and then the West is kind of where all the problems are being created. Right? So the Missouri Compromise is going to be when we have two new states admitted into the Union. And this happens in 1820. So keep in mind, this is happening fairly early, fairly early on compared to the stuff that we're talking about in the sectionalism unit. So in 1820, Missouri is going to apply to become a slave state, which again, we've talked about the representatives in Congress wanting to keep that even balance between the slave and the free states. And it's not going to fly with the free states to just simply admit Missouri. So we're going to have a compromise be met where if Missouri does come in as a slave state, then a new free state would be admitted called Maine, which was formerly part of Massachusetts. We've been talking about since the early days of the colonies. In order to kind of keep that balance, right? And then in addition to those two states being added, we also have the 3630 parallel will be established as the boundary of what can and what cannot have slavery. So I'm going to pull up a picture here, 3630 parallel. And again, this is this boundary here where the green line is. There is going to be the deciding factor of, all right, from this point forward, according to the Missouri Compromise, there cannot be slavery north of this line, any of this new territory, but south of it is all fair game. They can't have slavery down below it. We're going to see this is going to be, it's not going to work out for very long when it comes to the United States and their admission of new states. It's going to kind of not always going to work out for them. But again, that's the idea of the Missouri Compromise. Maine will come in free. Missouri is a slave state. And the 3630 parallel will be the line. North of it cannot have slavery. South of it can have slavery. Who proposed it? Congressman Henry Clay. Remember, that's the guy that we talked about in the corrupt bargain back with Andrew Jackson's election. And it is the same guy here. List the terms of the Compromise of 1850 now. So we're going to jump ahead 30 years. And we see the Compromise of 1850, again, has to do with the compromising between the North and the South. And when it comes to the representatives in Congress not really agreeing on the admission of new states. Well, what's going to happen here is we're going to have four key things happen with the Compromise of 1850. California will be admitted as a free state. The second part is that Utah and New Mexico territories can use popular sovereignty to decide for themselves. Remember, popular sovereignty means power to the people. How do people have power? They have the power to vote. So it's basically saying Utah and New Mexico, the people there can vote and decide what they want to have, whether free or slave territory. Third, the trading of slaves, but not slavery, is banned in D.C. So you can have slaves in the District of Columbia in the national capital, but you cannot have slave auctions or trade slaves inside D.C. And lastly, a stricter fugitive slave law. So that's going to make the slave owners happy. As you can imagine, stricter fugitive slave law, as it sounds, means that now there's going to be more laws put in place that's going to require northern states to be compliant with runaway slaves and their capturing and returning them back to their plantations. This is going to be a big, big piece that's going to upset many people and make even people that were kind of on the fence in between become those abolitionists. Remember, an abolitionist, someone that disagrees with slavery once it outlawed. And now that they are being told that northern states must comply with helping find, capture, and return runaway slaves. Number 5, what is popular sovereignty? As I said earlier, it's ultimate power is in the people, right? Think popular, think people. People have the power, not the government. The people have the power to decide things for their day-to-day life. What is Bleeding Kansas? As a response to the Kansas-Nebraska Act. The Kansas-Nebraska Act is going to allow for popular sovereignty in the Kansas and Nebraska territories. Most of the violence happening in Kansas when we have pro and anti-slavery supporters flooding into the territory, and they're going to be violence will quickly ensue in Kansas. Some people say the first blood spill of the Civil War is not spilt at Fort Sumter in South Carolina, but it's spilt out west before the war officially starts, because the war has not started yet, but we already have people shedding the blood of each other on this core issue of slavery. And the idea is it going to extend? Because again, I can't emphasize that enough, is that the idea here and the arguments and the fighting here is all about the extension of slavery. Is slavery going to extend westward? Remember, Abraham Lincoln, when he's elected president, says that he does not plan on abolishing or getting rid of slavery outright overnight. But he did agree with the idea of slowly killing slavery by not allowing it to extend to new territories out west. And that's the basis of the Republican Party that we've been talking about. What caused the violence in Kansas? Again, the popular sovereignty in those territories is going to have multitudes of people from both sides flooding into the territory, trying to sway that vote. Things get violent. Number 8, what effect did Uncle Tom's Cabin have on the public? So it's going to have, again, sectionalism here in our unit. Very divided views on the novel. Remember, this is a fictional novel written by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Abraham Lincoln later will actually meet Harriet Beecher Stowe. Will allegedly tell her, so you're the little woman who started this great war. Not saying that it's her fault to start the war, but she really got things going. And when it comes to more supporters of the abolitionist movement in the North and in the South, people are going to protest the federal government more because they feel like this is the South felt like this is a lie being told to the North. So you can see there, the South will protest it. The North will kind of see like, wow, like open their eyes to the horrors of slavery, and now slavery is going to become more of a moral issue, not just so much of I don't think it's right. Now it's kind of being brought to the forefront. Number 9, what effect did the Dred Scott case have on slavery debate? So remember, the Dred Scott case is going to be the case where we have a man named Dred Scott who's a slave in Missouri, taken to the North for a number of years. Will come back south. His slave master dies, and he's going to fight for his freedom. But we're going to see that, we'll go over this later in the review sheet, that the Dred Scott case does not go in his favor. Number 10, why did the Republican Party form? In 1854, the Republican Party emerged to combat, again, the extension or the expansion of slavery, not just simply exterminating slavery outright. They wanted to stop the spread of slavery going west, and therefore slavery would eventually be suffocated by the other pro-abolitionist states. Number 11, what is important about the Lincoln-Douglas debates? These are the debates not when Lincoln's president. He's actually running for Senate in the state of Illinois. He does lose this election against Stephen Douglas, but he does win in the aspect that he gets more popular, people are more recognizable, and he will win the presidential election 2 years later in 1860. Let's see, what else do I have here? Douglas reaffirmed. Yeah. Douglas was a big proponent, a big leader in the idea that let's let the states decide. Let's let popular sovereignty rule the nation when it comes to the slavery issue. And so that is kind of Stephen Douglas in the Abraham Lincoln debates. And 12, what is the result of the election in 1860? Lincoln's going to win, right? Lincoln wins. Republicans in the South's political dominance, which means at this point, pretty much since Jackson's days, the Democratic Party, which dominated pretty much the majority of the South, had kind of ran the table on the politics. But we see in 1860, we start seeing the turn. We start seeing the Republican Party becoming more prominent, and they are going to kind of begin to be a more, not so much of just one major party in America dominating the political spectrum. And of course, South Carolina will secede from the Union, as we discussed in class. They are going to be the first state to secede, which again means to formally withdraw, to leave the United States. What was the Fugitive Slave Act? As we mentioned above, it was mandated that northern states now must comply, help aid in searching, finding, capturing, and returning runaway slaves to their plantations. 14, how did the North respond to the Fugitive Slave Act? Northern abolitionists are going to fear or feel the U.S. is taking defense and supporting the Constitution of slavery or the institution of slavery. They feel that all the abolitionists that have been working for so many years had been kind of slapped in the face by the federal government, and the federal government really kind of reaffirmed the idea that no, we support this idea of slavery since Congress supported the idea of the Fugitive Slave Act. 15, what did the Mexican Cession affect the debate over slavery? It affected a whole lot, right? The Mexican Cession is that entire territory. I'll pull up a map here. The whole territory the United States will get from the U.S.-Mexican War, which is right here, which now makes up Arizona, New Mexico, part of Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, Nevada, California. They're all going to be parts of this Mexican Cession that are going to open up the doorway of that idea and that contest of the slavery issue and the extension of slavery. 16, list the goals of the Republican Party and the Free Soil Party. Free Soil Party was a party that aligned itself with the idea of abolition, of getting rid of slavery. And the Republican Party had that idea as well of stopping the spread of slavery going out west. 17, how did the South respond to the election of 1860? Pretty poorly, as you can imagine, right? Notice, we talked about South Carolina will secede from the Union. They're going to leave the United States. And other states in the South will also leave the United States as well. Texas being one of them amongst the other states. I'm not going to go into them because you don't need to know that for the test. But again, it's important to know South Carolina will be the first to secede from the Union. Harriet Beecher Stowe, the lady that we mentioned earlier that wrote the anti-slavery novel that Lincoln will even comment on. It's called Uncle Tom's Cabin. Number 19, who wrote The Liberator, the anti-slavery newspaper? William Lloyd. I don't know why it says Floyd. That is incorrect. William Lloyd Garrison. Remember L for Liberator, L for Lloyd. That's the way I would remember it. Again, anti-slavery newspaper. That means that he is writing stuff against slavery. He is fighting for the abolition of slavery. Number 20, John Brown attempted to capture the blank armory in order to arm a slave revolt. It is Harper's Ferry. Harper's Ferry, at the time it was Harper's Ferry, Virginia. Now it is barely in the state limits of West Virginia. Define Kansas-Nebraska Act. 1854, created the territories of Kansas and Nebraska, opened up new lands for settlement, had the effect of repealing the Missouri Compromise. Again, what you need to know for the Kansas-Nebraska Act is that's going to open up the idea of popular sovereignty taking control of Kansas and Nebraska. It's then going to lead to bleeding Kansas. What's a fugitive? Person who has escaped from somewhere and they're avoiding arrest or capture or persecution. What is a martyr? A person who is killed because of their religious or their deep beliefs in something. John Brown, to some abolitionists, will be seen as a martyr whenever he is killed at Harper's Ferry. Dred Scott versus Sanford. Make sure you understand this court case is extremely important. Dred Scott will sue for his freedom, as we mentioned, since he lived in a free territory. He will claim he had taken into a free territory in the U.S. North. So he should have been freed with the idea and the concept of once freed, always freed. Once free, always free. He does not win his court case. The U.S. Supreme Court, SCOTUS, rules that African Americans or anyone of African descent, free or enslaved, were not United States citizens. Therefore, they cannot sue in the court of law. 2, the Missouri Compromise was unconstitutional. So going way back to 1820, it's saying, by the way, that thing that said that you cannot have slaves north of that 3630 parallel, that is incorrect. The United States does not have the authority to mandate what you can and what you cannot have, or where you can have it, so to speak. And then number 3, Kansas-Nebraska Act and other laws citing popular sovereignty were unconstitutional. So again, it's kind of poking holes in the movement that the abolitionists have been working towards and saying that basically the United States government has no business dictating what people can and can't do based on where they live. If you can do it in one place, why can't you do it in another place is kind of the idea here. It's going to be, as I mentioned, a huge slap in the face to the movement and to the abolitionists that have worked so hard for, at this point, decades, trying to make change in the United States. And it is going to show that the federal government, at the very least the Supreme Court, is in favor of slavery, and they don't seem like they have any indication that they want to change that anytime soon. Some other things that aren't on the review sheet that I want to go over here. Remember when we talk about a house divided, think about a house. right? And think of the United States as our house here. If you're in one house, right, and you're on one team, right, you're one body together, you're not going to work very well together if you're divided, right? If you have core, deep beliefs that you don't agree with and that you're not going to be willing to work together, you're probably going to find yourself not having much, not making much ground and being able to do pretty much anything without things resulting back to that problem that you have with that person in your house. And so the idea of a house divided means that the house is kind of breaking apart. The United States is breaking apart. And what's the core issue of breaking the United States apart? It's the idea and the institution of slavery. Okay. Next part is the idea of the extension of slavery. What caused this? What caused this sectionalism? These problems. It's the extension of slavery out west. We'll look at all the stuff we've been talking about. This whole review sheet. Why did they go back to the root problem of what it was? Was can slavery move out west? Next thing is the sectional differences. Why did these places? Why were they so different? Why did they have slavery in the South and not have slavery in the North? Remember, it all goes back to their economy. It goes back to the plantation economies. Think way back to 1607 with Jamestown being established. And in Jamestown, what did they establish it for? They established it for profit. They didn't find gold, no, but guess what? They started planting tobacco. They started creating the plantation economy in the South. In the North, we saw something very different. We saw more families going up there. They didn't have rich, fertile soil in the North, so they'll begin to do things like shipbuilding, whaling, lumber, trade, things like that. So again, the sectional differences are all tied back to their economies, and that's what's going to divide this nation. Make sure on the test there's one or two reading questions. Make sure you're just reading carefully. There may be some things that you may think that you don't know we never learned about this concept, for example. But if that's on there, I promise it's simply a reading comprehension question. You read what it's asking you to look for, and then read the excerpt, and you're answering it based off that. Okay, because there is a question that we haven't talked about that specific thing, but nothing you learn in class affects that answer. All you need to do is read it and be able to comprehend what is it saying, and then okay, well that's the answer. So I don't want anyone to get tripped up on I don't know this, I'm gonna guess. Okay, so just make sure you're reading carefully. We're talking about mining. Remember, mining is think of like gold mining. Okay, that's gonna be really important on this test for you to know for some part of it. So make sure you know mining means gold mining. Okay. The U.S.-Mexican War. So what was the reason the U.S.-Mexican War started? Remember, the United States will go down south of the Nueces River, north of the Rio Grande, and that's where we had the boundary dispute. The Mexicans said that the Nueces was the boundary. Americans said the Rio Grande was the boundary. So in the U.S. eyes, they had not crossed the border. In Mexican eyes, they had. So we have conflict, and that's what leads to the U.S.-Mexican War beginning. And then wouldn't hurt to brush up on your amendments. Okay, there's one question about the amendments or about one of the Bill of Rights amendments. So make sure you're catching up on, or remember, First Amendment is the 5 Freedoms Amendment, right? Remember those hand signs? So it's the freedom of RAPS, okay, the acronym, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, freedom of the petition, freedom of the press, and freedom of speech. Okay, that's the 5 freedoms of the First Amendment. So overall, do your best on the test, of course. If you have any questions, let me know. I think this will help you all out. Give a pretty comprehensive review here over what will be on the test. Again, you're watching this in class, but feel free to watch it at home. It'll be on Schoology, and there's really no... and I'll review the other videos too. The videos from last week before spring break. Those will help you as well.